Unit 8. Fundamentals of Kinesiology and Biomechanics in Sports. Kinesiology is the study of motion, and biomechanics is the sports science field that applies the laws of mechanics and physics on athlete performance. Kinesiology helps to perform detailed analysis of sports movements during sports activities and helps to improve technique of performing a skill. Biomechanics helps to design an effective training program based on need and requirement of an athlete. It is important for physical education teachers, coaches and trainers to have knowledge about kinesiology. Meaning of kinesiology science. Kinesiology is a Greek word in which kinesis means movement and logi means to study. In this way, kinesiology means study of movement. It is the study of principles of movement and to study the motor performance of the players. Kinesiology helps the players to increase their performance by developing the movement in their body part. Meaning of biomechanics. Biomechanics is the study of the mechanical laws relating to the movement or structure of living organisms. It focuses on the application of the scientific principles of mechanical physics to understand movements of action of human bodies and sports implements. Biomechanics in sports can be defined as the muscular, joint and skeletal actions of the body during the execution of a given task, skill and/or technique. Proper understanding of biomechanics has the greatest implications on sports performance, rehabilitation, and injury prevention, along with sport mastery. Importance of kinesiology and biomechanics in sports. Movement analysis. Kinesiology and biomechanics helps physical education teachers and coaches to do detailed analysis of movement of athletes and train them in more effective manner to gain maximum benefit while performing. Improve sports performance. Kinesiology and biomechanics both helps to improve sports performance of athletes by improving their motor skills and technique. Kinesiology helps to understand the basis of motor skills, whereas biomechanical principles helps to improve sports technique, equipments, and modify training methods to improve sports performance of athletes. Improves technique. The application of kinesiology and biomechanics improves sports technique. Identify faults in posture. The knowledge of kinesiology and biomechanics is helpful in analyzing the posture and body movement. Principles of biomechanics. Sport biomechanics is the science of explaining how and why the human body moves. It applies several biomechanical principles to gain advantage in sports performance and improve the quality of sports equipments. It is important to know these principles when examining the role of biomechanics in sport and exercise. There are 7 common principles of biomechanics. 1. Stability. Stability is a state when all forces are balanced and the body remains at rest and is directly proportional to the weight of the body. 2. Maximum effort. Joint movements are essential for maximum force production, such as hip rotation, to provide greater force when kicking a football. 3. Maximum velocity. Maximum velocity is achieved by combining the speed of previous movements and transferring this speed to the final implement. 4. Impulse. The greater the applied impulse, the greater the increase in velocity. 5. Reaction. Newton's third law of motion states that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. 6. Angular motion. Torque. Angular motion is circular motion caused by force acting at a distance from an axis. And 7. Angular momentum. Angular momentum is the movement of a mass when it is rotating or spinning, calculated by multiplying the angular velocity with the movement of inertia. If the mass moves closer to the axis of rotation, the angular velocity increases, while if it moves further away, the moment of inertia decreases. Kinetics and kinematics in sports. Kinematics and kinetics are two divisions of dynamics that study the connections between the forces operating on a body and how those forces impact motion. Kinematics explains the motion, while kinetics investigates the forces that create it. In terms of time, displacement, velocity, or acceleration, kinematics analyzes motion from a geometrical perspective, without regard to the forces that propel the motion. Kinetics is the study of how forces create or modify motion, taking into account the impact of various interacting items and their interactions. Newton's three laws of motion are included in kinetics, which examines the forces that propel motion. Kinematics focuses on the specifics of the swing's motion in the study of the golf swing, such as the club head's shape, its path, the position of the body and the club at different swing events, the velocities of the body parts and the club, and the timing of the body's slowing down for the club's accelerating. Time, position, displacement, distance, velocity, speed, and acceleration are all basic kinematic quantities. A complex motion of an item can be broken down into the angular motion of the body with respect to its center of mass, COM, which is also a kinematic problem. The angular velocity patterns of body segments, lines, and clubs serve as the foundation for the kinematic sequence graphic. Types of body movements: flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, rotation, circumduction, supination, and pronation. Any activity which leads to the change of place, position, or posture of the body is called movement, like gliding, angular movement, or number 1. Gliding movement. Gliding movement is the simplest type of activity that occurs on a combined gliding surface without any rotation and angular movement. Although all these activities are common, but it is the only activity whose mobility is limited in carpus and tarsus. Number 2. Angular movement. Angular activity occurs between the long bones. In angular movement, the angle between the two bones become more or less, which is due to turning back and forth of the joints such as hip and shoulders. The different types of angular movements are given below. A. Flexion, bending or reducing the angle between two bones at a joint, e.g. in biceps curls, lifting the weight reduces the angle at the joint. Moving lower leg upwards. B. Extension. It is the straightening of a joint or increasing the angle between two bones, e.g. in biceps curls, lowering the weight. C. Abduction. Moving away from the body or midline. Example: moving the arms upward, sideward. Moving leg away from the body. D. Adduction. Moving the body part organ towards the body or midline. Example: lowering down the arms from sideways upward position. Moving legs towards the body. Number 3. Circumduction. It is one of the 4 basic movements allowed by the various joints of the skeleton. It is a combination of abduction, adduction, extension, and flexion. Number 4. Rotation. Rotation is the twisting movement produced by the summation of small rotational movements between adjacent vertebrae. At a pivot joint, one bone rotates in relation to another, while at a ball and socket joint, the humerus and femur rotate around their long axis. A. Supination. Supination is a movement of the forearm that returns the bones to their parallel positions and moves the palm to the anterior-facing position. B. Pronation. Pronation is the motion that moves the forearm from supinated to pronate, produced by rotation of the radius at the proximal and distal radioulnar joint axis. Axis is defined as an imaginary point or line around which the movement takes place. In other words, an axis is a straight line around which an object rotates. An axis has a 90 degrees relationship. There are three types of axis. 1. Frontal axis. It is an imaginary line which passes horizontally from side to side or left to right at the right angle to the sagittal plane. It is also known as lateral or coronal axis. 2. Sagittal axis. It is an imaginary line which passes horizontally from front to back at the right angle to the frontal plane of motion. 3. Vertical axis. It is parallel to line of gravity or perpendicular to the ground and right angle to the transverse plane of motion. It is also known as longitudinal axis. Planes. It is an imaginary two-dimensional surface through which the body segment or units moves. The movement takes place through this imaginary surface plane which bisects the body. The plane must pass through the center of gravity. It is always right angled to the axis. Planes are of three types. 1. Sagittal or anterior-posterior plane. It is a vertical plane passes through the body from front to back, dividing it into right and left halves. Example, flexion and extension movements such as biceps curls, knee extension stops. 2. Frontal or lateral plane. It is vertical plane passes through the body from side to side, dividing into anterior and posterior halves. Example, abduction and adduction movements such as jumping jacks and spinal lateral flexion occurs in this plane. 3. Horizontal or transverse plane. Horizontal plane divides the body into upper and lower halves. Example, throwing the head to the side, lateral movement. 4. Diagonal or oblique plane. It is combination of more than one plane. Practically in games and sports, most of the movement occur in more than one plane.